The thing about first contact protocols is that nobody ever prepares you for the furniture. They brief you on language barriers. They drill you on diplomatic gestures, forbidden hand signals, colors that mean death in 12 different star systems. They make you memorize 600 pages of xenocultural guidelines, and somewhere on page 437, there's a footnote about ceremonial seating arrangements that I definitely should have read more carefully. My name is Cole Marin. I'm a structural linguist attached to the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, and 3 hours ago, I accidentally started a political crisis that could end in my execution. Let me back up. The Valori Empire controls more star systems than humanity has cataloged. Their homeworld, Ethera, is the kind of place that makes you feel like you've been living in a cardboard box your entire life. The capital city rises from a violet sea and spiraling towers of crystallized mineral that hum with a low harmonic frequency you can feel in your teeth. Everything glows. The walls, the floors, the air itself seems saturated with bioluminescent particles that drift like lazy fireflies. The architecture doesn't just exist. It performs. Every arch and corridor is designed to make you feel small, and it works. Humanity had been trying to secure an audience with the Valori ruling house for 11 years. 11 years of rejected transmissions, ignored envoys, and one unfortunate incident where our ambassador accidentally gifted them a fruit basket that contained a species they considered sacred. We were not, to put it mildly, their favorite neighbors. So when the invitation finally came, it came with conditions. A small delegation, no military escort, no recording devices. And the audience would take place not in a neutral chamber, but in the throne hall of the First Crown, the most sacred political space in their empire. Our team was 5 people. Ambassador Leung led the group, flanked by 2 cultural advisors and a security attaché who wasn't allowed to carry weapons. I was there because the Valori language has 17 tonal registers, and I was the only human who could reliably distinguish between "I respectfully greet you" and "I challenge your bloodline to mortal combat." The difference is a quarter-tone shift on the 3rd syllable. You can see why they needed me. We arrived at the throne hall after a 40-minute walk through corridors that smelled like ozone and jasmine. Our Valori escort, a tall, silver-skinned official named Kale, moved with the kind of rigid precision that suggested he'd rather be escorting a plague ship. He hadn't spoken to us directly. He communicated through a translation device that rendered everything in a flat monotone, which somehow made his contempt even more obvious. The throne hall itself was overwhelming. Imagine a cathedral designed by someone who thought Notre Dame was a bit understated. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, supported by columns of dark crystal that pulsed with slow, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat. The floor was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting everything so perfectly that it felt like walking over an abyss. Hundreds of Valori courtiers lined the walls, their silver and pale blue skin luminous, their eyes, those striking amber and gold irises, tracking us like predators watching something stumble into their territory. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the throne. And even from a distance, it was clearly not just a chair. It was a living structure, grown from the same crystalline material as the columns, but darker, almost black, with veins of molten gold running through it like circuitry. It pulsed with that same slow heartbeat rhythm. The seat was wide, curved, almost organic in shape, and it was surrounded by a faint halo of light that made it look like it existed slightly outside of normal space. It was empty. Kale positioned our delegation to the left of the dais, in a designated area marked by subtle differences in the floor's pattern. Ambassador Leung began reviewing her notes. The cultural advisors whispered nervously. I stood near the back, trying to look professional while my legs ached from the walk and my inner ear struggled with the planet's slightly off gravity. That's when things went wrong. See, the Valori concept of waiting is different from ours. When they said the princess would receive us, they meant it in their time, which could mean minutes or hours. Our escort didn't explain this. He simply positioned us and then left, presumably to go somewhere he didn't have to look at humans. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. The courtiers didn't seem to mind. They stood like statues, occasionally murmuring to each other in tones too low for me to catch. But our team was flagging. Ambassador Leung kept her composure, but I could see the strain. The security attaché shifted his weight constantly. The cultural advisors looked like they might pass out. I needed to sit down. My back was spasming from a compressed disc I'd earned on a rough shuttle landing 2 years ago, and the gravity differential was making it worse. I looked around for any kind of seating. There was nothing in our designated area, nothing along the walls. The Valori, apparently, didn't believe in chairs for anyone other than royalty. But just to the right of our position, partially obscured by a column, I spotted what looked like a bench or a low seat. It was dark, unoccupied, tucked into an alcove that seemed separate from the main hall. There was no glow around it, no obvious markings. It looked, to my very human eyes, like a completely ordinary piece of furniture that someone had left in a corner. I caught Ambassador Liang's eye, pointed to my back, and gestured toward the alcove. She glanced at it, frowned slightly, then gave a distracted nod. She was deep in preparation mode, running through her opening remarks for the 1000th time. I walked to the alcove, turned around, and sat down. 3 things happened simultaneously. The surface beneath me came alive. It wasn't cold crystal. It was warm, almost body temperature, and it responded to my weight like a living thing, shifting and conforming to my shape. Veins of gold light erupted through it, racing outward from where I sat like cracks in ice, spreading across the floor, up the walls, along the ceiling. The entire throne hall flooded with golden light. Every single Valori in the room turned to look at me, and a sound rose from the courtiers, not a gasp, not a shout, but something worse. A harmonic tone of pure, collective horror, hundreds of voices hitting the same devastating frequency at once. It vibrated in my skull. It made my vision blur. I looked down. The seat I was sitting on wasn't a bench. It wasn't tucked away in some forgotten corner. What I had failed to understand, what my human sense of spatial reasoning hadn't accounted for, was that the Valori throne hall was designed in a spiral. The alcove wasn't separate from the dais. It was the other side of it. I was sitting on a lower extension of the throne structure itself, a secondary seat grown from the same living crystal, connected directly to the main throne by veins of gold that were now blazing with light because I had activated them with my body heat. I was sitting on the consort's throne, the seat reserved exclusively for the chosen mate of the ruling monarch. And it had accepted me. I started to stand up. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to get off this thing, to run, to apologize in all 17 tonal registers at once. Don't move. The voice came from behind me. It was low, clear, and carried an authority that bypassed my brain entirely and spoke directly to my spine. I froze, not because I chose to, because my body simply obeyed before my mind could process the command. I heard footsteps, measured, unhurried. The crowd parted with a sound like silk against silk, and she walked into my peripheral vision. Princess Sevara of the First Crown, heir to the Valori Empire, was not what I expected. I'd seen images, of course, briefing materials, diplomatic files. But images don't capture the presence of a Valori royal. She was tall, nearly 6.5 feet, with skin like polished moonstone that shifted between silver and pale violet depending on the light. Her hair was white, not the white of age but the white of starlight, and it fell past her waist in a cascade that seemed to move with its own subtle gravity. Her eyes were gold, not amber, not hazel, gold, like molten metal, with pupils that contracted to sharp vertical slits as they fixed on me. She wore armor, not the flowing robes I'd expected from a princess receiving diplomats, but a form-fitting suit of dark crystal plates that moved with her body like a second skin, edged in the same golden light that was currently blazing from the throne beneath me. A thin circlet of black metal rested on her brow, set with a single stone that pulsed in time with the throne's heartbeat. She was beautiful in the way that a blade is beautiful, in the way that a star-going supernova is beautiful. You admire it, and you understand, with perfect clarity, that it could end you. She stopped 3 feet from where I sat. Her gold eyes moved over me with an expression I couldn't read, not anger exactly, not surprise. Something calculating, something ancient. The hall was dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, and I was fairly sure everyone else could too. I said, "Don't move," she repeated, and this time the words carried a harmonic undertone, a secondary frequency that my trained ear recognized as a command register used only by the ruling bloodline. It wasn't a suggestion. It was, technically, a royal decree. Okay, I said. My voice came out remarkably steady, all things considered. I'm not moving. Her eyes narrowed fractionally. You speak our language. Some of it. I'm still working on the subtleties. You are sitting on the consort's throne of the first crown, the Yeshival. It has not been activated in 400 years. She paused. And you believe this is a moment for subtlety? Fair point. Ambassador Leung's voice cut in from somewhere to my left, tight, with barely controlled panic. Your Highness, I must apologize profoundly on behalf of the United Earth delegation. Our linguist acted without understanding. This was an accident. We meant no disrespect to your sacred. I am not speaking to you. Savara didn't look at the ambassador, didn't even turn her head. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and the weight of that gaze was almost physical. I am speaking to the man on my throne. The word she used for my carried a possessive harmonic that made something in my chest tighten. From the crowd, I heard movement. Armored figures were pushing through the courtiers, guards in dark crystal plate, carrying weapons that looked like elongated shards of obsidian glass. They formed a semicircle behind the princess, and every one of them was looking at me like I was something they needed to scrape off the floor. A tall Valori male stepped forward from among them. He was broader than the others, his silver skin marked with dark geometric patterns that I recognized from my studies as military rank designations. High military rank. Your Highness. His voice was a controlled rumble. This creature has committed sacrilege of the highest order. The Yeshival responds only to biological resonance. Either this human has somehow falsified the bond signature, which is an act of war, or the throne has genuinely accepted him, which is impossible. Savara's voice was silk over steel. And yet, Commander Drail. She gestured toward me, toward the golden light still pulsing from the crystal beneath me. Synchronized now, I realized with a sick lurch, with my heartbeat. The Yeshival does not lie, she said quietly. It has never lied. Commander Drail's expression twisted. Then we must consider the alternative, that this human has been engineered specifically for this purpose. That Earth sent him here as a weapon disguised as a diplomat. A biological key designed to force a bond claim on the Valori throne. That is absolutely not what happened, I said. Every eye in the room snapped to me. The guards' weapons hummed with activated energy. Ambassador Leung made a small, strangled sound. Savara tilted her head. The gesture was alien, reptilian almost, and it made her circlet catch the light. You were not given permission to speak. With respect, Your Highness, I also wasn't given permission to sit down, and look how that turned out. Silence. A silence so complete I could hear the crystal walls humming. Then something extraordinary happened. The corner of Savara's mouth moved. It wasn't a smile. It was the ghost of a smile, the suggestion that a smile might exist somewhere in the vicinity if conditions were favorable. It vanished instantly, but I saw it, and more importantly, so did Commander Drail. His expression darkened. I'm a linguist, I continued, keeping my voice level. I study languages. I'm not a weapon. I'm not engineered. I have a bad back. I haven't slept in 30 hours, and I sat down because I was tired. That's it. That's the entire conspiracy. The Yeshival does not activate for the weary, human. It activates for biological compatibility with the royal bloodline. Savara stepped closer, close enough that I caught her scent, something electric and clean, like the air before a lightning strike. It reads genetic markers, pheromone signatures, neural architecture. It determines, with absolute precision, whether a being is capable of producing viable heirs with the seated monarch. She let that sentence land. Oh, I said. Yes. Oh, I processed this. I processed it in the way you process the information that the building you're standing in is on fire. Quickly, incompletely, and with a growing sense that your immediate future has become very complicated. So when you said, don't move, I said don't move because if you break contact with the Yeshival before the recognition cycle completes, the throne's defensive protocols will interpret it as rejection of the bond. The penalty for rejecting a bond with the first crown is death. Not symbolic death. Not political death. The crystal itself will stop your heart. She paused. I was saving your life. I looked down at the glowing throne beneath me. It pulsed warmly, contentedly, like a very dangerous cat that had settled into my lap. How long is the recognition cycle? I asked. It varies. The last recorded activation took 6 hours. I leaned back slowly. Great. I'm going to be here a while then. The next 2 hours were the strangest of my life, and I once spent 3 days translating peace negotiations between two species that communicated entirely through interpretive dance, so my bar for strange is fairly high. The court did not disperse. If anything, it grew. Word had spread through the palace, and Velori nobles, officials, military commanders, and what I assumed were religious figures poured into the throne hall until it was packed with hundreds of bodies, all of them staring at the human sitting on their sacred throne. The bioluminescent particles in the air seemed to multiply with the emotional energy in the room, creating a haze of agitated light. Ambassador Leung was escorted to a separate area with the rest of our delegation. I caught her at once. She looked like she was mentally composing her resignation letter. Savara did not leave. She stood near the yeshival, sometimes pacing slowly, sometimes still as a statue, always watching me. Various advisors approached her in hushed, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Words like precedent and contamination and once disposal. Commander Drail was the most vocal. He'd gathered a faction of military officers and was making his case loudly enough for me to hear, which I suspect was intentional. The bond recognition is a biological accident. The yeshival was designed for Velori genetics. A human triggering it is a malfunction, not a mandate. We should terminate the cycle, terminate the human, and purge the throne's memory. And the last time a recognition cycle was forcibly terminated? Savara asked. Silence from Drail. The yeshival shattered. She answered her own question. It took 200 years to regrow. My great-grandmother's reign was nearly ended by the instability that followed. You would risk that again. I would risk anything to prevent a human from holding a claim to the Velori throne. He doesn't hold a claim. Her voice hardened. The yeshival's recognition identifies compatibility. It does not create a bond. A bond requires the consent of the seated monarch. Her gold eyes cut to me. My consent. The emphasis she placed on that word was heavy with implication. So this is all moot, I said. The cycle completes. I get up. No bond is formed because you don't consent, and everyone goes home. Right. Savara regarded me. In principle, there are complications. Of course there are. She moved closer, and the crowd shifted to watch. Every step she took was observed, analyzed, politically weighted. I was beginning to understand that nothing a Velori princess did was private. Her entire existence was a performance, and right now, I was an unscripted element in a show that had been running for millennia. The yeshival has not activated in 400 years, she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. The intimacy of the volume felt deliberate. In that time, every potential consort presented to the throne has been rejected. Hundreds of Velori nobles from the finest bloodlines. Rejected. The court has whispered for decades that the throne is broken, that the royal line is failing. Some have used it as justification to challenge my family's right to rule. She paused, and something flickered behind the gold of her eyes. Something that looked, impossibly, like vulnerability. And now the yeshival activates. For a human, a species most of my empire considers barely sentient. She straightened. Do you understand the position this puts me in? I did. I understood it with a clarity that surprised me. She wasn't just dealing with an awkward diplomatic incident. She was dealing with a legitimacy crisis. The throne had spoken, and it had chosen an outsider. If she dismissed the recognition entirely, she confirmed the narrative that the throne was broken. If she acknowledged it, she legitimized a human's compatibility with the royal bloodline, which her political enemies would use as evidence that the bloodline itself was degraded. She was trapped, and she was standing in front of hundreds of witnesses, unable to show a single crack in her composure. I understand, I said quietly. Something in my tone made her pause. She studied me, and I had the disorienting sense of being read at a level far deeper than visual. Velori perception, I remembered from my studies, extended into electromagnetic fields. She could probably sense my heart rate, my neural activity, the chemical composition of my emotional state. You're not afraid, she said. It wasn't a question, but there was surprise in it. I'm terrified, I said honestly. But fear and panic are different things. One of them is useful. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she turned to address the court. The recognition cycle will be allowed to complete, she announced. Her voice carried effortlessly through the hall, hitting every ear with crystalline precision. The human will remain on the yeshiva under my protection until the process concludes. Any interference will be treated as an act of treason against the first crown. The reaction was immediate. A wave of sound, harmonics of outrage, confusion, and something I couldn't identify swept through the crowd. Commander Drayle stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "Your Highness, I have spoken, Commander." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority in those 4 words was absolute, ancient, and terrifying. The yeshiva is sacred law. Its processes are inviolable. Or do you now place yourself above the throne you swore to protect? Drayle held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back, jaw tight, eyes burning. Savara turned back to me. For a fraction of an instant, so brief that I almost missed it, I saw exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of command, of constant performance, of being watched and judged and challenged in every waking moment. Then it was gone, sealed behind gold and steel. "You should be comfortable," she said, her voice returning to its formal register. "The cycle may take several more hours. I've been in worse situations. I find that remarkably difficult to believe. I once had to mediate a trade dispute between the Kesseri and the Thol Confederacy. The Kesseri negotiate by screaming, and the Thol consider silence an act of war. The meeting lasted 43 hours. I lost my voice and 8 pounds. That ghost of a smile again. Slightly more substantial this time. "You are a strange creature, Cole Marin." It was the first time she'd used my name. I hadn't told her my name. "You read our briefing materials," I said. "I read everything." She settled into a position beside the Ashavel, not sitting, but close enough that it almost looked like she was standing guard. "Tell me about this language you study." "Mine." So I did, partly because she asked, and partly because talking was the only thing keeping me from fully processing the fact that I was sitting on a sentient alien throne that had decided I was genetically compatible with the most powerful woman in this sector of the galaxy. I told her about the 17 tonal registers, about the way Valori grammar embedded emotional context directly into verb conjugations, so that you couldn't describe an action without also conveying how you felt about it, about how their word for stranger shared a root with their word for possibility, and how their word for enemy shared a root with their word for mirror. She listened, not with the polite tolerance I was used to from diplomats, but with genuine attention, her head tilted at that precise alien angle, her gold eyes focused with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in a room full of hundreds. "You hear things in our language that most Valori never notice," she said. "The root connections, the embedded emotions. My own tutors taught me grammar as a set of rules. You see it as a living system. Language is how a species thinks. The structure of your language tells me that the Valori don't separate logic from feeling. Every statement is simultaneously rational and emotional. You literally cannot speak without expressing both. And humans can? Humans are experts at saying one thing and feeling another. We have entire industries built around it. We call it politics." This time she actually smiled. It was brief, controlled, immediately suppressed, but it was real. It transformed her face in a way that the briefing materials hadn't prepared me for. For just a moment she looked young, not ancient and regal and dangerous, just young and amused and startlingly beautiful. Commander Drayle watched from across the hall. I could feel his hatred like a physical force. The 4th hour brought crisis. A new figure entered the throne hall, tall even by Valori standards, draped in robes of deep indigo marked with symbols I recognized as belonging to the Covenant of Thrones, the religious body that governed the sacred laws of Valori succession. His skin was darker than the others, a deep silver that was almost charcoal, and his eyes were pale, washed-out gold, like a sunset fading to white. "High Covenant Aravesh," Savara said, and for the first time, I heard tension in her voice that she couldn't fully conceal. The High Covenant moved through the crowd like a blade through water. Everyone parted. Everyone bowed. When he reached the dais, He looked at me with an expression of clinical fascination, like a scientist examining a particularly unexpected lab result. "The Ashavel has spoken," he said. His voice carried that secondary harmonic, but his was different from Sevara's. Where hers commanded, his resonated with something older, ritual authority. "In 4 centuries we have waited. In 4 centuries we have presented our finest, and the throne chooses this. The throne's wisdom is not ours to question," Sevara said carefully, "as the covenant itself teaches." "Indeed." Aravesh's pale eyes moved between us. "Which is precisely why I am here. The covenant has convened. We invoke the right of verification." The reaction in the hall was immediate. Sevara went very still. "The right has not been invoked in 600 years, yes. But then, the Ashavel has not accepted a consort from an alien species before either. We are in unprecedented territory, Your Highness. The right will determine whether the throne's recognition is genuine compatibility or an aberration." "What does the right involve?" I asked. Aravesh looked at me with faint surprise, as if the furniture had spoken. "You will be tested. 3 trials, each designed to measure the qualities the Ashavel seeks in a potential consort: resilience, perception, and sacrifice. And if I fail, then the recognition is declared void. You will be free to leave." He paused. "Assuming you survive the trials." "Assuming." The rite was designed for Velori physiology. Some accommodation may be necessary, or perhaps not. The Ashavel chose you as you are. I looked at Sevara. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could read the tension in the set of her shoulders, the slight flare of her fingers at her sides. She was calculating, running through scenarios, political consequences, power dynamics. "I'll do it," I said. Her eyes snapped to mine. "You don't know what you're agreeing to. I know that if I refuse, the recognition is void anyway, and your political enemies use this entire incident to undermine your family's claim to the throne. At least if I take the trials, there's a chance the throne's choice is validated." I held her gaze. "And your position is strengthened." Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but I'd spent my career reading the nuances of alien communication. What I saw in her eyes was reassessment, not of the situation, of me. "You would risk your life for my political position," she said, her voice carrying a harmonic I'd never heard before, one that wasn't in any of my reference materials. "I'd risk my life because it's the right thing to do. Your political position is a bonus." The recognition cycle completed 20 minutes later. The golden light pulsed 3 times, then slowly faded. I felt the throne's warmth withdraw, and the crystal beneath me became inert. Just stone, just a chair. I stood slowly. My legs were stiff, my back ached, and I was about to submit to ancient alien trials that might kill me. Standard Tuesday. The first trial was resilience. They brought me to a chamber beneath the throne hall, a natural cavern where the crystal grew wild and uncut, jutting from the walls in jagged formations that hummed with discordant frequencies. The sound was wrong. It pressed against my eardrums, my sinuses, the space behind my eyes. I realized it was designed to overwhelm Velori senses, which operated on a wider spectrum than human ones. For them, it would be deeply uncomfortable. For me, with my more limited perceptual range, it was merely agonizing. I had to walk from one end of the cavern to the other. That was it. Just walk. But with every step, the crystal frequencies intensified, targeting different parts of my nervous system with surgical precision. Pain receptors fired randomly. My vision fractured into prismatic shards. Gravity seemed to shift direction. I walked. I focused on my breathing. I thought about the 17 tonal registers of the Velori language, cycling through them in my mind like a meditation. It gave my brain something to hold on to while my body was being systematically assaulted. I made it to the other side. I'm not going to pretend it was graceful. I collapsed against the far wall with blood running from my nose and my hands shaking so badly I couldn't make a fist. But I made it. When I emerged, the court was waiting. Sevara stood at the front, her expression unreadable. but I noticed that her hands, previously loose at her sides, were now clenched. She'd been worried. The second trial was perception. They placed me in a room with 7 Valori, each wearing identical robes and masks. I was told that one of them was Sevara. I had to identify her. No visual cues, no voice, just whatever I could perceive. I closed my eyes. The room smelled of ozone and jasmine, the baseline scent of the palace, but underneath it, something else. Lightning before it strikes, clean and electric and sharp. I opened my eyes and walked directly to the third figure from the left. I reached out and touched the edge of her mask. "How?" Aravesh demanded from behind me. "She told me earlier that she reads everything," I said. The third figure is the only one whose eyes are tracking the room systematically, reading the reactions of every person present. The others are focused on me. She's focused on everything. I didn't mention the scent. That felt private. Behind the mask, gold eyes glittered. The third trial was sacrifice. Aravesh explained it simply. I would be given a choice. I could leave, walk away from the throne hall, return to my delegation, and depart Ithara. The recognition would be voided. No consequences, no political fallout. Sevara had negotiated that concession during my first trial, apparently threatening to dissolve the Covenant's advisory authority if they didn't agree. She had done that for me. Spent political capital she probably couldn't afford to give me a way out. Or I could stay. Accept the recognition. Not as a consort, not as a bondmate, but as what the Valori called an Ashavel touched, a being acknowledged by the throne as compatible. It carried no romantic obligation, but it would tie me to the Valori court permanently. I would become a figure in their political landscape, a target for their enemies, a symbol of an unprecedented connection between species. The sacrifice wasn't dying. It was giving up the life I knew. I looked at Sevara. She stood apart from the court, alone in a way that I suddenly understood was not temporary. She was always alone, surrounded by hundreds, watched by millions, and fundamentally, terrifyingly alone. The throne had rejected every consort for 400 years, not because it was broken, but because it was waiting. I didn't fully understand what it was waiting for. I wasn't sure she did either, but I understood loneliness, and I understood what it cost to stand in front of a room full of people who wanted to control you and refused to break. "I'll stay," I said. The court erupted. Drail surged forward, shouting. Aravesh raised his hands for order. Ambassador Lung was going to have an aneurysm. The bioluminescent particles in the air went haywire, creating a storm of agitated light. Through all of it, Sevara stood perfectly still. Her gold eyes held mine across the chaos of the room, and in them I saw something I'd never seen from her before. Not gratitude, not relief. Something fiercer and more fragile than either. Recognition. The hall took 20 minutes to settle. When it did, Aravesh stepped forward with the weight of centuries in his bearing and spoke the formal declaration. The rite of verification is complete. The trials have been passed. The Ashavel's recognition stands. Let it be recorded that Kol Marin of Earth is Ashavel touched, acknowledged by the throne of the first crown. The words hung in the luminous air. I could feel them changing things, rewriting political equations, shifting the balance of power in ways that would take years to fully manifest. Drail left the hall without speaking. I knew I'd made an enemy. I knew he wouldn't be the last. The court began to disperse. Ambassador Leung was escorted to a communication chamber to begin what would undoubtedly be a very long conversation with Earth. The cultural advisors looked shell-shocked. The security attaché gave me a look that mixed admiration and pity in roughly equal measure. And then it was just me and Sevara. She stood on the dais beside the now dark Ashavel, her armor catching the ambient glow of the hall. Without the crowd, without the ceremony, she looked different. Not smaller, never smaller, but more real, more present. "You didn't have to do that," she said. The formal harmonics were gone from her voice. What remained was clear, unadorned, almost human in its directness. "I know. You understand what you've committed to. The danger? The scrutiny? The enemies? I'm a linguist. I've spent my career trying to understand people who are fundamentally different from me. This is just a more permanent assignment. She was quiet for a moment. Then she descended the dais steps and stopped in front of me. This close, I could see the faint patterns in her skin, fractal geometries that shifted and changed with her emotional state. Right now, they were moving slowly, contemplatively. The Ashaval measures compatibility, she said. Not destiny, not love, compatibility. You understand the difference? I do. Then you understand that what happens next is not written, not by the throne, not by tradition, not by prophecy. It is written by us, by choices. I've always preferred it that way. She studied me. Those gold eyes up close had depths I hadn't noticed before, layers of color that shifted like light through deep water. You see things that others miss, Colmarin. Root connections, hidden structures. You listen to the shape of words instead of just their meaning. Occupational hazard. Is that what you're doing now? Listening to what I'm not saying? I think what you're not saying would take me years to translate. That smile again. Longer this time. Unguarded. It reached her eyes, and when it did, the fractal patterns on her skin shifted into something warm and luminous. Then I suppose, she said, you have years. She turned and walked toward the far entrance of the hall, her armor catching the light with every step. At the threshold, she paused, looked back over her shoulder. The violet light of the corridor beyond framed her like a painting, like a window into a future I couldn't yet see, but could feel, pulling at me with a gravity all its own. Welcome to the court, linguist, she said. Try not to sit on anything else. She disappeared into the light. I stood alone in the throne hall of the first crown, surrounded by crystal that hummed with a frequency I was only beginning to understand. The Ashaval pulsed once beside me, dark but not dormant, patient in the way that only ancient things can be patient. I had come here to translate a language. Instead, I'd stumbled into a conversation that would take the rest of my life to finish. I looked at the throne. I looked at the corridor where she'd vanished. I started walking,